In the program Current Affairs, we now bring you a discussion on developments in 2013 and challenges ahead. The participants are V. Raghuraman, former Secretary General, Assocham, Professor Sushila Ramaswamy, Delhi University, Alok Bansal, Executive Director, South Asian Institute for Strategic Affairs, and Parsa Venkateshwar Rao, Jr., Political Analyst, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
We are here to discuss some of the major developments of 2013, and as we look back to the year, we also look forward to say what will be the impact of these developments, of these events in the coming year in 2014. The major things have been on the economy side. There has been a lot of concern because the early part of the year and the middle of the year saw a very steep decline of the rupee vis-a-vis the US dollar, and that raised a lot of not panic but anxiety in the Indian business, which was reflected in the stock market, in the value of the rupee. Then there was the political buzz, political excitement, and even to an extent turmoil, which was accompanied by these 4 state assembly elections, which was watched very keenly, and the results are now being interpreted as to what they mean for the next year Lok Sabha elections. On the foreign policy and security front, the old description that we live in a very unstable neighborhood has only proved to be too true, with the developments in Afghanistan, with Pakistan violating the ceasefire line and even the international border on many occasions, and the developments in Sri Lanka forcing some domestic positions because of the positions taken up by the Tamil Nadu Dravidian parties. So, like in any year, it has not been quiet. It has caused a lot of excitement and a lot of fear. But the most important thing was 2013 began with the street protests in Delhi against the rape and murder of that helpless girl in December last year. And it was a spontaneous protest. Young people came out, old people came out. Delhi had not witnessed that kind of protests for a long, long time. And the government had to sit up and take notice, and it did pass rather unanimously, where all the parties concurred, a very stringent anti-rape law, which one hopes would be a deterrent. But it showed that in a democracy, people's voice is meant to be taken seriously. And towards the end of the year, through the assembly elections, especially in Delhi, we have seen that the people have again expressed their opinion through the ballot box, and the entry of the Aam Aadmi Party, AAP, in Delhi showed that people chose a new player. If I may start with the economy has really raised a lot of concern in greater part of this year, especially the decline of the rupee, though I think it has recovered slightly. Mr. Raghuraman?
Actually, we have been going through challenging times. In fact, we have been noticing the last 2-3 years, in fact, till last year, it was thought to be total policy paralysis, which arose out of many of those alleged scams of 2G, followed up by the case of Colgate, etc. So we find that we were in a sort of a turmoil, and we were not able to see exactly where we are going. Compounded to this, we had the global economy, which is also going through difficult times, and the U.S. economy, which actually taper off its quantitative expansion, is something which created quite a lot of panic in the Indian market, and there is actually a run on the rupee. And that has been somewhat arrested now. But the point is that we have been having constantly declining economy, and this is something which has never happened in the last 10 years and is a cause of worry. And the government has been on a firefighting mode, and also it has been seeing exactly how to put its house in order. And there have been some signs of it which are happening today, especially with respect to the way coordination committees have been formed to see how stranded projects can be really moved forward so that there is more effective coordination, and also deal with land and environmental issues so that projects which are really head up, how they can be speeded up, because lot of non-performing assets are really forming up due to projects not taking off in time and or are being held up, and more than 200,000 crores of just power projects are held up. So I think these are all areas of concern. Added to this, we also have the problem that the manufacturing sector is not at all responding, and if you look at the index of industrial growth, it has been negative for quite an amount of time, and there has been no signs that we are getting investments back, or there are no signs that there is a recovery. So all this point towards actually expectations during the next year that probably many of these bottlenecks will be traded off and we will have green shoots appearing. We do hope that it will be possible because the bountiful monsoon, we expect that the agricultural economy is going to give a lot of spending power in the rural economy, and that may actually have a consumer push with which we may be able to get some recovery. Probably we are having the year past will be the annus horribilis. We hope that especially the next year, the coming year, will usher in new developments.
Two general points. One, it looks like that we'll have a 5% GDP growth, but compared to other countries, both in Europe and North America, where the growth rate is not even touching that, do you think there is some satisfaction to be gained from that?
I don't think so, because if you look at the last 10 years, in fact, the new normal is 7% growth, and we are having teeming millions who are looking for jobs. And unless we are able to actually create and also see 10 to 12 million jobs are created every year, it's going to be a nightmare for all of us. And that's something which we will have to see, that growth has to be put back and also ensure that jobs are created.
Do you think that the private sector, for various reasons, for external environment and other reasons, they have not been able to feel enthusiastic and really step up the gas, as it were?
It is not because of just private sector. Public sector is not investing. You look at the Coal India or NTPC, they are not able to go forward because of environmental and other kinds of reasons. It's not that they don't have the money. Their money is there. But unfortunately, they are not able to go ahead. Plus, there are center-state issues. And we find that the same kind of momentum or the kind of urgency is not there between center and state and also between various departments. That's what the coordination committee is trying to see, whether they will be able to really remove some of these kind of bottlenecks.
What is your assessment of the FDI inflows this year?
No, because the question is, in India, it will be the public sector investment, followed up by private sector investment, followed up by FDI. I think we are more to do with the course by which the investments will flow into this country. And the second point is especially the type of hassles one has to face with respect to the various agencies, environment, etc. And this is something which we need to see how we can fix them. In fact, this is where the government is working on, and we do hope that we will find some sort of...
Do you think that the private sector is sensitive to the environmental concerns?
Let us take the case of like coal. Whatever Coal India is doing, private sector should do. But the point is, when Coal India itself is sounding wanting, or NMDC itself is sounding wanting, just look at the private sector alone. So the question is, we have to look at the whole thing as not public-private sector, as the manner in which industrial development in this country can happen.
In conformity with the minimal
whether it's public sector or private sector.
Do you think environmental safeguards are necessary to an extent?
Surely. In fact, nobody is saying that we're having environmental risk, but we'll have to have predictability, and also there's a time frame. And when we are putting up any projects or anything, even the government or anybody, nobody knows exactly what are the full and long-term consequences of many of these effects. So we need to understand not only that there are global compulsions on climate change, and we need to know exactly how investments are going to happen. And also we have to look at energy security. We do not have coal, we do not have oil, we cannot mine our own coal. So there are a lot of problems with it.
Sushila Ramaswamy, do you think that, as he has pointed out, most of the economic difficulties or woes or obstacles are because of policy paralysis, and it comes back to the political stream, political decision making? Through the year, we have seen a certain political turmoil in both at the center and in the states.
Yes, to a very large extent, there has been a sense of drift, and the level of consensus which should have been there is not there. The problem is that the focus is just on the growth rate in the country without looking into the commensurate need to reform the state, make it accountable, make it people-friendly, deliver the goods that people want. Development has to be a very holistic affair. Now that is not in place in this country. It is not just last 2 years, but ever since this whole process of liberalization has started. Somehow we look at it that the command economy needs to be now replaced by dismantled, and now you have something like a semi-private public kind of enterprise. But the key thing in terms of making a country truly democratic would be to make the government a custodian of the people. And that is where I think the Aam Aadmi Party success lies. They have at least been able to capture the imagination of the people in the urban areas, where there is a sense of disgust with rampant corruption, total disconnect between government and people, the attitude that we need to kind of depend more on our own private resources rather than depend on government, and all these are very wrong signals or wrong ways things are shaping up.
Do you think the UPA has failed to clarify the priorities?
I'll put it this way, that unless and until all the players in the political domain have a sense of common purpose, elections, yes, you fight it out and that is part of any democracy. But unless there is that sense that we have to work for the good of the country, the good of the nation, and you try and reach a level of consensus amongst the political parties, and the parliament should be the place where these debates take place, discussion takes place. Over a period of time, we've seen the decline of the parliament in terms of a debating body. That doesn't exist. And every party seems to feel quite happy about the fact that they have brought the parliament to a standstill. That itself is not a very good thing. On the other hand, I'll also say that certain things have been good last 1 year. You take the role of the Supreme Court, which has tried to strengthen constitutional democracy in this country by kind of introducing not the above option, so that some kind of synchronization can be there between the votes percentage and the seats that have been obtained. It's towards leading to some kind of a majoritarian system. Because the problem with the first past the post system is that even with a minority vote, you can
still emerge the winner.
Winner takes all. That itself is something that needs to be looked at. Electoral reforms are needed. The court is playing a proactive role. What should be the domain of the executive? That's not happening.
What Finance Minister Chidambaram said in Parliament, that there is no consensus on the economic agenda in the political class. Is that really going to affect the livelihood or lives of the people? Because basically, unless there is growth, there will be no jobs, whether it is in the private sector or the public sector. And the government is not able to create the consensus because everybody is divided on that.
Yes, to a very large extent it's correct, but I think here the Reserve Bank Governor has come out with this very interesting book called The Fault Lines, where he is dissecting what exactly is the problem. He is pointing to the fact that India is a very paradoxical country where you have the third largest number of billionaires on one hand and this vast teeming millions of people who are deprived, destitute, and next to America and China, we are the third in terms of the number of billionaires. But India is different from both United States and China. That kind of inequality, the large mass of people who don't even have the basic needs fulfilled, that does not exist. So I think these are things which need to be looked into. That in terms of how we strengthen the growth rates, how we bring about policy consensus on economics, and more so even on the political.
Would you say that our institutions are still sort of surviving the tests and the stress, that is the parliament, the judiciary and the executive, despite the faults? Because as long as the system remains, the system can absorb the shocks, that it will be able to go. What is missing or what is lacking is the ability of the players, the political parties, the governments, the political executive.
I think it's mainly lack of political will, the desire to come together and work and evolve a certain political culture that political parties must have, that once elections are over, then they work together as policy makers, whether they're in the treasury bench or in the opposition, they think in terms of the overall good of society. Politics can be contained, it can be minimized, it cannot be eliminated, but within that framework, think of the larger good.
The Parliament this year has passed some landmark legislation. One, we have the Land Bill. Then recently they have passed the Lokpal and Lok Ayukta Bill. Then there is the National Food Security Bill. to a certain extent, and more or less every party was agreed that these are main things. Lokpal and food security, nobody has really opposed. Land bill also, everybody said there was a need for a land bill. So there is some sort of action on the part of the
corporate social responsibility under the companies bill. So you find that there have been number of things which have happened on this front.
There is movement, at least on the legislative front.
You need also labor reforms. You need electoral reforms. You need police reforms. Dr. Manmohan Singh promised police reform some few years ago. I mean, the term is coming to an end. The state has to now become much more responsive to the needs of the average person in this country.
People through the civil society organizations are really asserting their opinion, and the government has to take note of it.
That is, of course, a development that has taken place. And this has essentially happened because the parliament, which should have been the place where discussions, debate take place and something emerges out of it by way of policies or bills, laws, that is not happening. So in some sense, the civil society has become active. That's not the domain of the civil society. I won't go to the extent of the failure of the political class, but in some sense, the political class has not really kind of lived up to the role of being a responsible leader that it should have been.
Responsible and responsive. It is failing on that count.
Sure.
Mr. Bansal, on the security front, especially in our neighborhood, do you think this year has been again a matter of concern? Because especially with the tensions rising with Pakistan?
2013 has been a landmark year. There have been pluses, there have been negatives all over in the vicinity of India's neighborhood, as well as within India. We have had a lot of issues. We had incidents on lines of control. In fact, in October, September, the incidents went so high that the temperatures were raised to a very great level. But what is significant is that all around India, there have been turbulence. Now you see in Pakistan, we had the first time that a democratic government completed 5 years and was replaced by another democratic government through the ballot. This has never happened before in Pakistan. We have the new army chief who has been appointed by the Pakistani Prime Minister. The Chief Justice, who had been very, very active, has retired. So Pakistan was going through a lot of turbulence. The US has declared that it will pull out of Afghanistan in 2014. The bilateral security arrangement is being negotiated. The Loya Jirga has passed the BSA. The president is still dragging his foot. He probably wants to have his pound of the flesh. He wants that probably the next candidate who becomes the president is his nominee, and he's trying to arm twist the US. The US is not willing to be arm twisted. So in case the US pulls bag and baggage, then we have a serious problem.
What is the kind of role that India looks in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of the US troops?
We must understand, firstly, why should India have a role in Afghanistan? And this is what is very important, and we need to understand that today's Taliban is very, very closely linked with the global Islamic movement, and it is no longer an insular movement as it was prior to 9/11. It's very closely linked with global Islamic movement, irrespective of what Mullah Omar orchestrates or says in his messages across. The fact is that the Kabul falls, and today the aim of the global Islamic movement is to establish a global Islamic Ummah. Many of the militants who are actually fighting in Afghanistan, if the Kabul falls to Taliban, are naturally not going to start plowing the land. They are going to move to different arenas. And one of the nearest arena which is available where there is a conflict is going to be Kashmir and India.
The Islamic extremists are still in the realm of fantasy that in real world there is a very limited options they have for their operations. They may create irritants for India and other countries, but they can't move beyond that because of their limited resources.
We need to understand what do they believe. We may look at it with a realistic manner, but they have a belief system. If you go through the book which Sayyid Salim Shahzad wrote before being killed, it tells you that the Al-Qaeda is in this particular part because they believe that this is the mythical Khorasan which the Islamic lexicon mentions and where there is going to be end of time battle. They believe that they are going to be victorious here, they are going to defeat Dajjal or the Antichrist here.
So there will be a lot of confrontation on that
Absolutely.
front.
And I think to that extent, India needs to bolster Afghanistan's security, and I think we are doing that. Afghanistan also realizes the approval ratings for India are highest in Afghanistan. Afghanistan signed its first strategic partnership agreement with India, even before the United States, which is still hanging fire.
In Bangladesh, digging up the old history and sending to the gallows the old war criminals, is it going to make the tensions within Bangladesh acute, and will that have an impact on India?
As far as hanging of Abdul Qadir Mullah is concerned, who was a Jamaat-e-Islami leader, is concerned, I feel his execution was essential because it required closure. His involvement in the killing of a lot of people was there, and their family members have not had that closure actually. There are certain allegations that the trials were not free and fair. There have been independent groups which have contested the conduct of the trials. But once having been sentenced, once he was involved in the killings and that had been established fairly, I think the killing was essential. And I think to a very great extent, Sheikh Hasina and her government, which was on the back foot till then, because she had not set up the interim government and there was pressure from the opposition that she's backtracking. The mayoral election she had lost and the general mood was against it. I think by this single movement, she has, I think, managed to get some reprieve, because what has happened is it's divided the society between pro-liberation and anti-liberation movements.
Do you think the Sri Lankan government has been able to assuage the anxieties of the Jaffna Tamils and given them a fair deal after the war has ended, but the peace is yet to settle down there?
What has happened in Sri Lanka is that there is a sense of triumphalism. Not only is the Sinhalese majority not willing to accommodate the genuine aspirations of the Tamils, I think they feel, why should they? The president had made a lot of gestures, but he believes in amalgamation. He doesn't believe in devolution. That's very important. Now the problem is the Tamils need devolution. When you talk to Sinhalese, they say, why devolution? There are more Tamils living outside Northern Province than in Northern Province. But that's no excuse. The fact is that you give them something for which they believe that they are no longer the second-class citizens. Because what has happened is that because of the Sinhalese triumphalism, not only are the Tamils being threatened, of late what we see is that the Muslims in Sri Lanka are also being targeted. There have been agitations against halal meat, the Muslim stores have been burnt, Muslim stores have been attacked. Now that sort of triumphalism is dangerous. Also what has happened is that in Sri Lanka, President has consolidated power to such an extent that he has virtually eliminated every single check on his power that existed. Whether it be judiciary, because the Supreme Court Chief Justice has been impeached, the restriction of 2 terms has been done away with, all the checks and balances that were imposed on him by 17th Amendment have already been done away with. So there is no check, virtually. And as it is, in the aftermath of the war and victory, he gloats.
And Nepal is still going through the process of the constitution making. Perhaps the outcome will be slightly better after, now that these elections are done.
Nepal has been a very, very significant thing because Nepal has gone through a long bout of turbulence. Firstly, I think Nepal's success has been that it has managed to integrate the Maoist fighters into the armed forces and security forces. The second is they managed to conduct these elections. These elections have proved that the Maoists are no longer the most popular party. Thirdly, the groups which were trying to oppose the elections to the Constituent Assembly did not really succeed because the poll percentage was very, very high.
So hopefully the constitution making process faces little less obstacle and perhaps it should reach to its logical conclusion next year.
Certainly. I think the only problem has been federalism and that they need to resolve. But with the Madhesi parties not doing as well in this particular elections as they had done the last time, I think their capacity to influence the eventual constitution that is going to be framed by this assembly.
Mr. Raghuraman, just to get back to you, do you think the success of India at WTO at Bali, does it mean well for our economy, for our farmers and for our agricultural sector?
Surely it's been a big bargain because we have been able to see that the multilateral process is back in shape. Otherwise, there are a lot of regional and also bilateral things which are being done because US is no longer interested with its own type of grouping. So I think it's a thing from the point of view that we have brought the multilateral forum to have some significant influence on the world trade. And to that extent, surely $1 trillion worth of global trade becomes important. And from that point of view, it is a good thing which has happened. I won't say it's a victory. It's a thing because no country can say that we have lost or we have won here because it's a question of being in the negotiations. And from our point of view, to be in the multilateral framework is the most important thing, and that's a great plus point which we need to recognize because that's what has been seen. Because when China also seen as one of the who are not actually backing our move, but China felt that having joined WTO, they were able to get good benefits out of their trade surpluses going up. So to that extent, surely it means that we have to be in the dialoguing process and also get the multilateral back into the global system.
Do you think that one of the important decisions the government has taken this year was with regard to multi-brand retail, allowing the FDI? Is it going to show any benefits for the Indian farm sector in the coming years?
What is the biggest problem of this government has been inflation. Non-cereal food inflation like onions and potatoes. In fact, this is something which we need to understand. And these can benefit with good cold storage and a value chain built up from the farm to the fork. But unfortunately, we have been having all sorts of apprehensions ourselves, and we are not able to get the type of investments which are needed.
Sushila Ramaswamy, with the election looming large in 2014, it will sort of alter the national agenda as such, that new issues will come up and new challenges, and that all these same problems will continue to linger and really haunt us in the next year too.
By and large, India's basic problem is economic. Unless and until we kind of concentrate on that, we'll not be able to get our house in order. But for that economic growth and success, you need a certain level of political consensus. We have to realize that we should stop being reluctant reformers, because we started off because of a certain compulsion. Even now, there is a great sense of a hermit-like existence in the mindset of many of us. That needs to change. Unless we are ready to face the fact that yes, we should be globally competitive, we should think global but act locally, unless and until these things kind of get imbibed in our way of functioning as a political group or as a nation, things will not change. Elections, yes, it will happen, and elections will bring in new players. The old parties will have to redefine themselves. All these things are there, but there has to be increasingly a sense of purpose that needs to be kept in mind, how to achieve these goals, where we started, where are we. That kind of stock taking is something that we need to be all the time focusing on.
Do you think between 2004 and 2009, the economy was doing well, so that the tax revenues were quite comfortable and good, and the government was able to dole out certain welfare measures which took care of the interests of the poor? But from 2009 to 2013, because the economy is in decline not only in the country but in the world, the government is not able to sustain its welfare measures, and it is failing on both the fronts. That is on the economy front as well as on the people front. Do you think that's a real challenge to any government, to any party?
I'll put it this way, welfare programs fine, but I think serious concerns is to make our economy competitive, have jobs-oriented growth rate, and make our students, young people, employable. These are things that need to be taken into account.
Mr. Bansal, the first term of UPA was a high point of India-US relations to a great extent. Somehow that seems to have dampened in the second term. Do you think things will improve?
Yeah, I think things will improve, because eventually there is a congruence as far as Indo-US interests are concerned globally, and with the Sino-Indian relations becoming little tenuous with these skirmishes on the line of actual control and on the borders, which to a very great extent are media creations, but those may probably nudge India closer to the US. India will never probably become an ally of the US, but I think there is convergence of interests as far as the global scenario is concerned.
We have looked at more or less at a 10-year, two-term performance of the government and the kinds of problems and challenges it faces and the country faces, both on the political and economic front. Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on developments in 2013 and challenges ahead. The participants were V. Raghuraman, former Secretary General, Assocham, Professor Sushila Ramaswamy, Delhi University, Alok Bansal, Executive Director, South Asian Institute for Strategic Affairs, and Parsa Venkateshwar Rao Jr., Political Analyst, who initiated and moderated the discussion. It came to you in the program Current Affairs, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about the program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.